The cold, barren wasteland stretched endlessly before Kane, the sky above a swirling sea of black clouds, heavy with ash from the countless battles fought in orbit. The ground crunched beneath his boots, littered with debris, broken helmets, abandoned weapons, and the twisted remains of alien and human alike. Every step echoed with the ghosts of those who had fallen in the war, a war Kane had been fighting for far too long. He was close now. His target, the alien general responsible for the near extinction of humanity, was within reach. After years of pursuit, Kane could feel it in his bones, the way a predator knows when its prey is weakening. The air crackled with tension, his senses sharpened by years of survival on the front lines. This planet, a desolate rock on the edge of the galaxy, was where the chase would end. Kane moved with the silence of a shadow, his combat suit muffling every movement. He scanned the horizon with his augmented vision, the visor of his helmet glowing faintly as it processed heat signatures in the distance. The alien forces, once massive and untouchable, were now little more than scattered outposts. The empire that had once spread fear across the galaxy was crumbling, and its general was the last vestige of its once mighty power. But Kane wasn't just after a trophy. This wasn't about glory. It was personal. Years ago, when the alien armada first arrived, they had descended upon Earth like a storm. Cities were razed, billions slaughtered in cold precision. Kane's family had been among the first casualties. He remembered the reports of how the general, with cold efficiency, had ordered the destruction of entire planets just to break the human spirit. But humanity hadn't broken. Instead, it fought back with a fury that the galaxy hadn't expected, and Kane had been at the forefront of that resistance. Now, after countless battles across distant worlds, he had finally tracked the alien down. The wreckage of what had once been a powerful command base loomed in the distance. Tall, jagged spires of alien architecture stood broken and battered, scarred from the relentless assaults of human forces. This base, Kane knew, had once been the nerve center for the general's operations. It was here that countless attacks on human colonies had been planned, where entire civilizations were condemned to extinction. And now, it would serve as the general's tomb. Kane's grip tightened on his rifle as he crept closer to the perimeter, his eyes never leaving the faint glow of the alien structure ahead. His helmet displayed readings of movement, alien patrols, weaker than they once were, but still dangerous. His lip curled in disgust. These soldiers, once the terror of the galaxy, were now nothing more than desperate survivors, clinging to the last scraps of an empire that was already dead. He picked them off one by one, his silent shots precise, cold, and unyielding. Each time, the aliens dropped without a sound, their bodies crumpling into the dust. Kane's movements were mechanical, driven by a singular purpose. He'd done this 1,000 times before, but this time was different. This time, the hunt was almost over. The general's reputation had been built on more than just cruelty. He was a master tactician, always 3 steps ahead, always anticipating human counterattacks. For years, he had evaded capture, slipping through traps and ambushes, mocking human forces with his calculated guerrilla tactics. But Kane had learned. He had studied the general's patterns, understood his mind in a way few could. Now, it was the general who was being outmaneuvered. Kane reached the edge of the ruined base, crouching behind the remains of a shattered tower. His visor highlighted the entrance to an underground bunker, the general's last refuge. The war was over for everyone but him. Kane could feel it, the slow unraveling of a plan years in the making. He activated the comlink to the human fleet orbiting above. "I've found him," Kane said, his voice low, controlled. "Moving in." The bunker's entrance hissed open as he approached, revealing a dark corridor leading into the heart of the base. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had led him here. The years of loss, the endless battles, the nights spent wondering if humanity would survive. It all culminated in this moment. The chamber echoed with silence as Kane stepped forward, his presence dominating the room like a looming shadow. The general, seated at the center, barely stirred. His once imposing figure, now a shell of its former self, sat slumped under the weight of his long campaign. Years of warfare had stripped him of the aura of invincibility that had once made him the most feared being in the galaxy. Kane stopped a few paces away, rifle raised but not yet aimed. He studied the alien before him, eyes narrowing beneath his visor. This was the same creature responsible for Earth's devastation, the deaths of billions, and the near annihilation of the human race. And yet, seeing the general now, Kane felt no satisfaction, only a cold, simmering resolve. His mission wasn't about revenge. It had never been about personal glory or the pleasure of watching his enemy fall. This was about survival, about ensuring that no more human lives would be lost to the ruthless hand of this once great warlord. The general slowly lifted his head, his pale, luminous eyes meeting Kane's. The defiance that had once sparked fear in the hearts of entire star systems had dimmed, replaced by a growing realization of his own vulnerability. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hoarse but laced with lingering pride. "You've won nothing, human," the general spat, his native tongue distorted to the universal translator embedded in Kane's helmet. "Even if you kill me, your kind will never survive. The galaxy will tear you apart as soon as you crawl out of your broken worlds." Kane's grip on his weapon tightened, but he remained silent. Words were meaningless here. The war, the suffering, the billions lost. It could never be reduced to a petty exchange of threats. The general's empire had already crumbled, but Kane wasn't here for a final speech. He was here to finish what had begun years ago. The general's gaze flicked over Kane, searching for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he let out a bitter laugh, a sound that echoed hollowly through the chamber. "You think this ends with me? You think your species has a future?" Kane stepped forward, his boots echoing ominously on the metallic floor. The general shifted, his confidence faltering as Kane closed the distance between them. The general's once pristine armor, now riddled with dents and scorch marks, told the story of countless battles. But it was clear this would be his last. His empire had already fallen. All that remained was this one final reckoning. "You killed millions of us," Kane said, his voice a quiet storm. "But you made one mistake." The general's eyes narrowed. "And what was that?" Kane leaned closer, the visor of his helmet reflecting the dim light of the chamber. "You didn't finish the job." Before the general could respond, Kane struck. In one swift motion, he brought the butt of his rifle down, shattering the alien's weapon to pieces. The general stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. His once imposing presence was gone, replaced by the same primal fear he had inflicted on so many others. Now, it was his turn to feel the helplessness that he had orchestrated for an entire species. The general scrambled to his feet, his voice rising in a desperate snarl. "You humans are nothing but vermin, weak, unworthy of the stars." Kane remained silent, advancing with cold precision. The general, panicked, lunged at him, swinging wildly, but his blows were clumsy, fueled more by desperation than any tactical skill. Kane sidestepped with ease, his movements fluid, controlled. Years of combat had honed him into something more than a soldier. He was a weapon, forged in the crucible of humanity's darkest hour. In a single brutal motion, Kane disarmed the general, twisting the alien's arm and forcing him to the ground. The general howled in pain, a sound Kane had heard countless times before, aliens, soldiers, civilians, all screaming as their worlds burned around them. But this time, Kane didn't flinch. He had long since become numb to it. "You thought we would break," Kane said, his voice low. "You thought you could wipe us out like we were nothing." The general's breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled beneath Kane's grip, his once unshakable resolve shattered. I was right," he choked out. "You're too late. Even if I die, there are others stronger than me." Kane's expression didn't change. "There's no one left." With a final, swift motion, Kane pulled the general to his feet, gripping him by the collar of his tattered armor. The once mighty warlord, now defeated and broken, dangled helplessly in Kane's iron grip. The room, once a symbol of alien dominance, now felt like a mausoleum, silent and cold. "It's over," Kane said, dragging the general towards the exit. The alien's body slumped in defeat, the last vestiges of his empire collapsing in his wake. As Kane exited the chamber, the darkness behind him seemed to swallow the alien's legacy whole. Outside, the storm still raged, but Kane knew that for humanity, a new dawn was coming. The fight was not over, but the tide had turned. And with the alien general in his grasp, Kane was about to show the galaxy what happened when humanity refused to die. The journey back to the fleet was as cold and silent as the planet they were leaving behind. Kane's grip remained firm on the alien general, dragging him across the icy wasteland toward the extraction point. Above them, the hulking silhouettes of human warships hung in the sky, their engines casting a faint glow against the dark clouds. It was a sight that had once seemed impossible. A united human force, defying the odds, standing tall in the aftermath of near extinction. Kane's mind, however, was far from the victory celebrations that awaited him. His gaze remained fixed on the broken figure he was dragging through the snow, the infamous alien general who had once been the galaxy's most feared warlord. The general, once full of pride and cruelty, now barely clung to consciousness. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body limp, his once imposing armor battered and torn. Every step seemed to drain what little remained of his strength. A flash of memory surged through Kane's mind. The day Earth cities had burned, the helplessness he had felt as humanity had been pushed to the brink. The general had been behind it all, orchestrating the destruction of entire planets with a single command. The carnage had left Kane with nothing to lose, nothing but the raw, unrelenting need to see his people survive. Now, with the general in his grasp, that goal was within reach. They reached the extraction point, just as the dropship descended through the ash-laden skies. A gust of wind swept across the battlefield, carrying the faint echoes of war with it. Kane signaled the ship, and the rear doors opened with a mechanical whir. Inside, a squad of human soldiers awaited his return. Their eyes widened as they saw what Kane had brought with him. The general, an alien legend, now reduced to a prisoner of war. One of the soldiers stepped forward, disbelief coloring his voice. "Is that?" Kane nodded, his voice steady but hard. "The general." The soldier let out a low whistle, all mingling with a sense of finality. "They'll want him on the capital ship, for the trials." Kane dragged the general toward the ship, the alien's feet scraping the ground, but the general offered no resistance. The proud warlord who had once brought humanity to its knees now hung his head in shame, too weak to fight back. He knew, just as Kane did, that there would be no rescue. The empire he had fought to preserve was gone, shattered by the resilience of a species he had underestimated. Kane felt a strange emptiness as the general was pulled aboard the ship. For years, this had been his mission, his sole purpose in a war that had consumed everything. But now that it was over, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Victory, even in this moment, felt hollow. Yes, humanity had survived, but at what cost? As the dropship's doors closed, sealing the general inside, Kane remained on the icy ground for a moment longer. The wind howled around him, a reminder of the galaxy's unforgiving nature. He stared at the horizon, where the wreckage of the alien base was still visible, a silent monument to the war that had raged for so long. The comm link in his helmet crackled to life. "Kane, this is command. We've got confirmation. The general is secure. The fleet is standing by for orders." Kane took a deep breath, his thoughts swirling. His mission was complete, but the war wasn't over. Not really. Humanity had won a battle, perhaps the most important one, but the galaxy remained vast and hostile. There would be other threats, other enemies. Yet, for the first time in years, Kane felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the war began. Hope. "Copy that," Kane replied, turning toward the waiting dropship. "I'll be en route." As he boarded the ship, the hum of its engines filled the air, lifting them off the desolate planet and into the skies above. Kane watched through the small viewport as the surface below shrank away, the frozen landscape giving way to the vastness of space. In the distance, the human fleet loomed, a beacon of humanity's endurance. The war had ravaged their worlds, but it hadn't broken their spirit. Kane knew that this victory wasn't just his. It belonged to every soldier who had fought and died, to every colony that had been rebuilt from the ashes. It was a testament to what humanity was capable of: survival against impossible odds, adaptation in the face of extinction. As they approached the capital ship, Kane allowed himself a moment of reflection. The alien general would stand trial, and justice would be served. The galaxy would witness the fall of an empire that had once seemed invincible, toppled by a species no one had expected to survive. But for Kane, the fight wasn't over. He knew the galaxy better than most, its dangers, its endless frontiers. The war had made him into something more than a soldier. He was a weapon, forged in the fires of humanity's darkest days. And as long as there were threats to his people, Kane would continue to fight. The ship docked with the capital ship, the metallic clang reverberating through the hull. Kane stood, readying himself for the next chapter of this long conflict. He wasn't finished yet. The galaxy had underestimated humanity once. It wouldn't make that mistake again. As the doors opened, and Kane stepped onto the deck of the capital ship, he was greeted by the sight of his fellow soldiers. They stood taller now, their eyes filled with the same hope that had carried Kane through the darkest moments of the war. The rise of humanity had begun,